Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Welcome to all those present in the meeting and also to those who are watching on the Council's YouTube channel. Welcome, everybody. Just to remind members and everybody else within the meeting, if you've got a mobile phone, can you please either switch it off or make sure it's on silent mode? Thank you. Webcasting. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be available on the channel shortly after the meeting. Members and officers are reminded to keep their microphones on mute unless they are called to speak. Members can indicate that they wish to speak using the meeting chat function. Please don't use that chat function to ask questions of officers or councillors because they will not be answered. Just all you need to do is simply write your name in whatever format you want, Malcolm in my case, or as appropriate, and that will pick you up that you want to speak. Members of the public are reminded that the planning and application process is constrained by the need to have regard of current planning policy at national, regional and local levels, as well as all other material planning considerations, including case law precedent. The decision-making process is often described as quasi-judicial because local planning authorities have to act reasonably within the bounds of planning law and the above considerations, and are not free to determine planning applications simply because of the weight of public opinion. This evening, we have no planning applications to actually determine, which is unusual. And instead, we have a consultation item, which is for information purposes only. We're now going to run through who's who from members and officers, and I'll come to others, people that are present in the meeting later on. So I'm just going to run through the councillors. If you can just say good evening or present, whatever, and then we'll know that you're with us, as it were. So I'll just go through in alphabetical order. So Councillor Roy Rohrer.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you, Roy. And Kim Bailey.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. And Councillor Mark Banyan.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor David Cunningham.
Good evening.
Councillor Lorraine Dunstan.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. Councillor Simon Edwards.
Good evening.
Councillor Leslie Heap.
Good evening, Chair.
Councillor Dave Ryder-Mills.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening, Dave. Councillor Rebecca Moll.
Good evening, Chair.
And I'm Malcolm Self, and I'm chair of this committee. Hopefully I haven't missed any councillors that are present in the meeting off. If I have, please give a shout, but I don't think I have. We've also got present officers. We've got Sam Nichols, who's Democratic Services, and he's here to take the minutes and keep order, make sure we follow the correct protocol, etc. We've got Barry Lomax, who's head of Development Management. We've got Toby Feltham, who's the lead planning officer for strategic major developments and planning delivery. And I'm not sure if Tim Naylor is present or not. He's the assistant director for planning. Is Tim on the meeting?
Yes, I am. Good evening, Chair.
Sorry, thank you, Tim. So Tim Naylor is with us. He's, as I say, assistant director for planning. That takes us on to apologies for absence and attendance of substitute members, and I'll turn to Sam for that. Thank you, Sam.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Archer this evening.
Thank you, Sam. The minutes of the meetings held on the 1st of July, the 9th of July, and this meeting will be taken to a future meeting for approval. So we don't need to vote on that this evening. That takes us to declarations of interest. Will any members, please, now is your chance to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests and any other non-pecuniary interests, i.e. personal interests, relevant to the item on this agenda. If you could indicate in the chat function, please, and I'll just pause a moment to see any names if they do come up. And there's nothing coming up. So I take it that there's no declarations of interest. Thank you. That takes us on to the real item this evening, which is a planning consultation item. This is an application. It's number 19/02323 for Canbury Place car park, along with 12 to 52 Kingsgate Road, 13 to 43 Richmond Road, all in the middle of Kingston. This planning application has been brought to this committee for information purposes only, ahead of making any formal determination. The applicant will present details of the amendments which have been made to the proposal and will provide detailed information on the traffic modelling. So now I'm going to turn to the applicants, and there's a number of people here this evening from the applicant. So what I'm going to do is ask you to do your presentation. If you, since there's a number of you, if you could just introduce yourself, say who you are when you speak, that would be great. So it's over to whoever wishes to speak from the applicants first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Matthew Mannering. I'm a planning consultant from WSP Indigo, and I will be picking up on some of the transport-related issues later on in the presentation. I won't say any more now, other than to introduce you to Joe Cowan, Chief Executive of Joe Cowan Architects, who is going to update you on the substantive design changes to the scheme since we submitted the application. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Good evening, Chair, and good evening, councillors. I'm just going to share my screen. No, that's not the right one. Sorry. 1 second. Perfect. In the first instance, is everyone able to see my screen?
It's just coming up now. Yep, it's come up on my screen perfectly. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everybody for your time this evening. Really what I wanted to go through before transport is give you an understanding since the submission last summer and the resubmission towards the end of last year, really where the changes have taken place to the Canbury Car Park and Richmond Road scheme, which we talk about as Kingston Gates. It's been a long process working both with the council, understanding their design objectives and the needs that we've needed to achieve with the site that work both really for the residents of North Kingston and Kingston itself, as well as our client and the overall redevelopment of the site as part of North Kingston Development Brief. And I'm just indicating the outline of where that site is to begin with. And ultimately, this shows, probably the key visual for us and what we've been trying to achieve, which is a really enhanced, strategy for looking at this as a comprehensive, regenerative redevelopment of sites that sit in close proximity to Kingston Station. I'm going to keep this presentation quite expedient. In the first instance, I'm going to discuss really the scheme and the strategy in relationship to the North Kingston Development Brief, and then go through overall the sort of massing, height and changes that have taken place since that, and some of the design changes, all of which have had extensive input from the case officers and the design officers and the overall planning team at Kingston. The public realm vision is critical for us. I think, no regeneration scheme can ultimately be successful unless it thinks about, what happens at ground plane. How do people use and move through a site, and how do we look at opportunities to create enhanced public realm and to create pedestrian and cycling and active movement corridors within a site? And the North Kingston Development Brief vision was very much to do that. They were looking at ultimately east-west, north-south routes through the site, and then sequences of green spaces. Ultimately, the scheme that we've developed in relationship to Queenshurst, the college, and Richmond Road and the Canbury Car Park has sought to do that. It's sought to promote that north-south access. However, starting to look in slightly different ways at the way we locate public space. One of the key aspects for us was when we were looking at the North Kingston Development Brief, and this was ultimately the outline form that was referenced to in the brief or in the guidance document. One of the key aspects that we did have struggles with was actually building hard up against Sopwith Way because of the nature of that environment. We felt that would actually have a negative impact in terms of air pollution and quality of space. And instead, being south, we actually sought to address this basis by looking at a way in which we could actually open up, create some public space there, create a better environment for the wider public benefit, and in so doing look at relocating height to this part of the site, which, whilst not strictly in accordance with the guidance of the brief, ultimately is the location that the brief also saw as most appropriate for height and scale on the site. In terms of where we got to at the previous submission, and actually some evolution has taken place from this is looking at the ground plane for the site, where 58,000 square foot of public realm and public open space, which builds on actually the good work that's been done on the north-south linear park, but looks at really how to unlock a triangular sort of junction point right next to the station and see how could we redevelop this, and how could we take the opportunity to provide a mixed-use scheme that was most appropriate at ground level in the first instance to the appropriation of successful spaces and successful places, not just for the residents of this development, but for actually the wider North Kingston itself. As part of this, we have over 55% of the site is given over to public realm, creation of jobs. We have co-working hubs, we have gyms, we have a nursery facility, retail spaces, as well as 389 homes above this, 137 of which would be affordable. We ultimately look really at how we could pull development back away from ultimately Sopwith Way and the approach, if you're coming from Kingston Station, how we could build on a sequence of public spaces, both Sopwith Gardens, which have had extensive work done, both the case officers and the design officers looking at the quality of that public space, as well as ultimately the Walter Street Gardens and the relationship then of the proposal for Richmond Road to provide and replace with new retail as well as apartments above that, and thinking about the benefits that could come from the setting back, pulling the scheme in, and really looking at how we could set it appropriately within the overall context. At mezzanine level, we again have an extension of the functions, the nursery, the co-working, the gyms, and then the lobbies for the residents. In terms of real development that's happened since ultimately I think we last presented to you towards the back end of last year, a lot of work has been done with the design and with the officers to look at the benefits actually to the north-south linear park that runs up past Queenshurst, the inclusion of the nursery, the consideration between how we balance out what's happened at the space alongside the college, and ultimately how we look at this as a balanced but urban environment that moves down towards the station, that's successful at ground plane and successful for people as they pass through the site every day. I think we have evolved some of the CGIs of the scheme. This scheme looks ultimately at Sopwith Gardens, so it's looking at the space behind that articulated acoustic green wall that provides that separation to Sopwith Way. These are public gardens. We're replacing ultimately across the site, I think it's 4.5 to 1 in terms of trees, so 55 new mature species are coming into sight. What you can see beyond us here is the Queenshurst development and the alleviation that's been given to that development looking through, and then the east-west route that runs past the co-working space. And I think ultimately being able to create flexible hub workspace is ever more relevant, in the post-COVID environment that we live in. Work has been done as well to the facades, but I'll come onto that as we go through. Another view which looks at ultimately extension of that public space, the gym spaces, the lifting and opening up of ultimately the walkway that leads you through between Sopwith Gardens and Walter Street, and then the on-site attenuation that we're utilizing as part of the sustainability strategies for the site. Just to ultimately give you an indication of the evolution of the scheme, really from start to finish. Ultimately, the early concept, we looked at breaks in the building to alleviate the daylight sunlight to Queenshurst, as well as bringing the proximity of that away. We looked at and worked at different ways of raising parts of the building and pushing some of the parts of the building down in order to look at beacons or landmarks. But ultimately, really, one of the key responses that we've had following the consultation with the residents and the work that's been done since then with the case officers within the planning department has ultimately been to really think about the improvements to transport, which Matt and Simon will come on to, but to actually bring down the height of the building and to think about the building at more along the lines of 17 stories rather than the 25 stories. And the reason for this really is to make improvements to townscape and respond to some of the key concerns that came both from the members and the residents of North Kingston. Just going back to giving you just a visual summary of where we were at the first submission towards the end of last summer to now. This was the view looking down Richmond Road. This is the 25-storey element of the building stepping down to a series of shoulders and the new building that sits along Richmond Road. And this is now the submitted scheme that was submitted last year. There's been quite a lot of work, and I won't go into too much detail about it, with looking at really the breaking down of the facades into smaller elements, reproportioning parts of the facade, and emphasizing what is an amazing amenity level. So it's the community spaces, the amenity spaces that sit ultimately at this level across the building, which are there for the residents of that building. This is a build-to-rent scheme. It's about creating affordable and accessible apartments that ultimately have a community within them and have a huge amount of amenity and facilities for those residents, such as co-working spaces and lounges and meeting rooms, and really trying to adapt to actually a much more modern way in which we live and work. This next major view, and I think this was one that had a significant concern. This is standing looking towards the Kingston station and the scheme of the original submission as it's sort of 25 stories. And this is ultimately the scheme as it's been reappropriated and reconsidered to reduce. We've looked at a breakdown of the scale of the facades with recessed bands, and we've lowered the shoulders on the building as well. I think this image is also very important because it shows you just how proximal this building and this redevelopment is to the station. We are directly in the town centre and located to the station. In terms of the Market Square, I've shown this image because it's Kingston's Market Square is absolutely one of the most amazing spaces in the town, and any building or any new building needs to be respectful towards that. Why I've shown you this image, and this CGI is a verified, it's not an architect CGI, so this has been created by an externally approved company, is to really demonstrate where you can see the top part at 17 stories of the revised submission, and it sits in that corner. And this viewpoint has been agreed with the case officers as being the part of the square you would see the building the most significantly. So we're not trying to hide from it. In terms of the original submission, this ultimately shows the build up to the 25 stories, and the way we looked at sort of vertical fins and a banding. We looked at a verticality to this building as a defining feature of it, in locating North Kingston and creating a sort of landmark for it. And in terms of the revised proposal, we've done significant work to move away from that, in the fact that we want this to maybe settle more as a series of effectively buildings and residential blocks that ultimately relate to one another and to the ground plane. And you see that deep recess that gets pushed through the middle of the building, which enhances the dual aspect, and the proportions of the facade start to change, as well as a reduction in them with these north and south terraces that are very beneficial in terms of the amenity offering and the quality offering to the residents. This gives an indication of the CGI of that amenity space, as I discussed, the recesses through the balconies for the building, and really the work that's been done ultimately with the planning team, particularly Chloe Clay, who's the Conservation and Design Officer, to come up with a palette and an articulation and a quality of architecture that is demanded and needed in order to ultimately successfully sit within North Kingston and do justice to such a key site within the opportunity area. These start to demonstrate the different bay and work we've done on bay and facade details, particularly when considered to lightening some of the materials, and that was particularly prevalent from the view from the Market Square towards the building, a softening, and then looking at that different combinative play with different materials, the quality of balustrades, the quality of space. Really, then, this is the view that looks, if you had the college behind you, it starts to indicate the play space that we see as something that's continuous throughout the site, through the foliage and the attenuation, the public spaces, the walk that you would come down that linear park through to the station, the drop-off points that come along Walter Street for taxis and deliveries to the building, keeping them off the major road network, and ultimately, this idea from the east-west direction to be able to see through that building and go back to those principles of the development brief. We've looked at a north-south and an east-west linear route. And again, then really just to finish, looking at the opportunity that we believe is being achieved by this mix and ultimately by this proposition in terms of benefits at ground plane. And actually, we do think it could be an amazing space and will be an amazing space, and hope that the residents ultimately can understand that the basis of what we're trying to do is inherently about creating a really high quality scheme that's absolutely rooted in the ground plane in Kingston, and provides an immense benefit, not just from jobs and work and space and place, but also ultimately in the creation of new homes, which is something that, you know, we are all part of needing to do across London. We need to provide new homes, and this site does sit as an opportunity area, and in our mind is appropriate for this. Perfect. I hope you did that in 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you. I think I'm assuming Matthew Waring would like to, Matthew Mannering would like to speak on the traffic aspects in particular. Is that correct?
That's right, Chair. I'll just try and share my screen with you. Hopefully you can see that screen share.
Yeah, it's certainly come up nicely on my screen, so hopefully everybody can see it. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, this is to give you and committee colleagues an update in terms of where we are with the transport aspects of the scheme. There's been a huge amount of work happening in the background, certainly through the back end of 2019 and into the first part of 2020 as well. But I thought it was worth just reminding, before we delve into the detail of some of the vehicular movement issues, just reminding ourselves in terms of what the brief was looking to achieve from a transport perspective in this broader context in North Kingston. So transformational change was the key thing, and looking to bring forward comprehensive development on a variety of parcels of land which were individually quite small, and if they were going to be developed individually, were going to not form a cohesive whole in terms of what the council was looking to achieve, and in particular the public realm aspects of that, which then facilitates far better pedestrian and cycle movement through this part of Kingston. It's trying to replace a car-dominated environment at the moment with the extensive public realm that I talked about, and really putting both the priority for pedestrians and cyclists in terms of the north-south route that Jo was talking about in her presentation, and also on an east-west route that connects the northeastern parts of Kingston and down to the river as well. And this scheme is looking to really deliver on those key aspects, as well as then obviously integrating the site into its surrounding context and some of the other developments that have come forward in the last few years, and trying to make the most of the opportunity in terms of its accessibility to Kingston Station and the fact that it benefits from a very high PTEL level. As part of that proposal of promoting sustainable travel, this development, I suspect, is somewhat unusual in being totally car-free. I mean, most of the schemes that have come forward in Kingston over the last number of years have included a variety of parking provisions, including the Queenshurst development, which has recently been completed. That has a large basement car park. This proposal is probably class leading in terms of trying to be entirely car-free and deliver on that public policy agenda of reducing reliance upon the car in areas which benefit from high accessibility levels, public transport accessibility levels. We are putting some blue badge parking into the basement to be fully compliant with accessibility requirements and blue badge requirements. And rather than the usual 40% standard for active electrical charging, this scheme is putting in 100% active charging to those car spaces. So each of the car spaces for blue badge holders will be fully functional in terms of electrical charging. and obviously in accordance with planning policy as well, we're accommodating cycle parking provision for 766 cycle spaces. In terms of the pedestrian environment, this area was identified by the council some time ago, probably going back to the late noughties and early 2010s as being an area deprived with a low level of public realm accessibility, and obviously that was a key sort of objective of the brief, was to try and improve that quality of open space within North Kingston. As part of that proposal, we've sought to absolutely deliver on those key aspects of both the east-west pedestrian route, as well as the extension of the north-south linear park next to the Queenshurst scheme, and actually make more of that, and make that a much larger space in terms of pedestrian environment, providing not only good access, pedestrian access for people to get to the station, and improved access, pedestrian access for the station, but also in creating spaces for people to dwell in as a piece of public realm in its own right. I think those are sort of key sort of pedestrian aspects of the scheme, which are important. As far as 7 Kingsway is concerned, members will be aware that the Royal Quarter development, which was developed in the early mid-90s by St George on the western side of Surrey base of 7 Kingsway, had a pedestrian footway on its side of the road, and the Berkeley development at Queenshurst has sought to create new footways and space for road widening on its side of the site as well. And what this scheme tries to do is, and does deliver upon, is deliver on that final phase where we've got the Kingsgate Business Centre at the moment. And if I just, I don't know whether you can see a pointing device on your screen at the moment, but this corner of the development here seeks to provide for the first time proper footways on both sides of the road, and not just footways, but proper public realm. And we've sort of widened the space on this side of the junction as well, so that the footways and the public realm on the Royal Quarter side of the junction are also substantially enhanced as well. And in this area here as well, we're proposing a new pedestrian crossing, and obviously that is part of the agenda of that east-west route, and providing that better connectivity down to the river, because currently at the moment pedestrians waiting at this junction, waiting to cross 7 Kingsway, there's no real sort of priority, and you really do have to wait for a gap in the traffic with no ability to create priority for those pedestrians. And finally then on this slide, in terms of Richmond Road, obviously the scheme is looking to set back the Richmond Road aspect of the redevelopment and create much wider footway along Richmond Road. Just by way of the way in which the transport proposals have evolved, there's been significant, well, I think it's worth casting our minds back as well. Prior to this particular planning application coming forward, the council itself, as part of its desire to bring forward comprehensive development on these sites, had undertaken a number of its own studies, transport-related studies, to help inform the principle of stopping up Kingsgate Road. And obviously we've taken those studies forward with a huge amount of transport assessment, and also engagement both with the council's transport team and also with Transport for London as well, who obviously have an interest in the proposals. In terms of 2 new changes which have happened since the submission of the application last September, we've, as I briefly touched upon in the previous slide, we've sought to realign the bottom of 7 Kingsway as it joins Sopwith Way, predominantly to give more priority to pedestrians and cyclists who are crossing along this junction here, but also to significantly widen the footway to provide more relief to the apartments in Royal Quarter, as well as stepping back the building so that we've got public realm and new soft landscaping that could go in on the eastern side of 7 Kingsway as well. And the other key move has been to bring forward a new left turn from Sopwith Way northbound onto Richmond Road, and to bring that forward as part of the phase 1 works to the scheme. So those are sort of two quite important changes we've made from a transport perspective with regards to vehicular movements. So this is the image of the Sopwith Road, Walter Street and Richmond Road junctions. So so you've got the existing context here. Now Walter Street is going to be part of the shared public realm, obviously. So the design of Walter Street is going to change radically from what you see on the ground today as being a traditional tarmac surface and curbstones and things, and it's going to, it's going to be completely redesigned from a landscaping point of view, and the combination of hard and soft landscaping proposals are really going to put pedestrians and cyclists in the predominance as far as movement through this space is concerned. But also we will create facilities for drop-off and taxi drop-offs through this area as well. But this is not going to be designed in any way as to encourage traffic through a combination of design of the materials and surfaces and access into this area, coupled with signage elsewhere through the town centre. Then the left turn at this junction is going to be provided at this point here, and rounding the corner to create 1 lane of northbound traffic and still two lanes of southbound traffic on Richmond Road. So those will come in as part of the phase 1 proposals, albeit that during the phase 1 works that vehicles will be limited to 7.5 tons. So it's smaller vehicles that'll be using this left turn as part of the phase 1 completion works to enable then the phase 2 works to happen, and then the gradual widening of this area along with the widening of the footway. But it's important, I think, just to bear in mind that that only 2% or less than 2% of vehicles that the modelling is showing is going to be using that left turn would conceivably be over 7.5 tons, and therefore through the uses of the signage strategy that we talked about earlier, those vehicles will be capable of using 7 Kingsway until, of course, the phase 2 is delivered, when all vehicle sizes can be accommodated on Richmond Road. So this is just a quick summary. I won't speak too long about this slide. This is just plotting out the level of analysis that has gone on, where we've gone back to on the other side of Kingston Bridge to do some modelling and traffic counts and survey data, being very clear about where traffic is coming from and how it's going to be affected in terms of the stopping up of 7 Kingsgate Road, as you see in green here. You can see that modelling has taken place and traffic surveys have taken place on all the key junctions in the area, and we've built in some pretty positive, significant growth assumptions, which are beyond really what the level of traffic growth has been in Kingston over the last sort of 10 years or so. But we've gone to quite significant lengths to give the worst case scenario, if like, and just demonstrating that can work in those situations, and it does work as well in terms of the way that the traffic moves on 7 Kingsway and Surrey Basin. So we've tried to take a completely robust approach on that and listen to the feedback that's been provided both from TfL and from the council's transport team as well. So this is looking a little bit more detail as to the some of the assumptions that I've just mentioned. So looking at quite exaggerated levels of transport growth. And to put that in context, if you look at the growth in traffic that's been happening in Kingston over the last 5 or 6 years, generally it's been very flat, basically, or a very slight increase in traffic growth, below the level of growth that had been predicted in the previous set of modelling, if that makes sense. But we haven't just sort of taken that at face value. We've tried to go quite a considerable step further in discussion with the various departments at the council, and factor quite a large degree of growth in, and modelling as well the amount of traffic that's going to come forward from potentially from other developments as well. But it's important to note here, obviously, that the scheme itself is not going to be putting any or very little. It's only the 18 blue badge spaces, which is effectively de minimis in traffic terms. So the scheme itself is very positive in terms of not putting any meaningful net additional traffic onto the network. And what we're trying to do here is demonstrate through the very extensive transport assessment, which runs to over 400 pages, which accompanies the revised submission, how that the existing traffic and its growth scenarios will be accommodated on 7 Kingsway, Surrey Basin, onto Richmond Road with a new left turn, and also through the rephasing of the traffic lights as well. In terms of public transport, there's an existing bus stop on Kingsgate Road, which we're going to, obviously that's being stopped up, and that's being relocated to Surrey Basin, and more is going to be made of that bus stop. That complies then with TfL's public transport standards in terms of the 400 metre spacing between bus stops, so that was an important factor. That was discussed, and TfL have inputted into the way in which the Surrey Basin bus stop will be provided, and we've agreed that proposal with them, and no doubt they will comment in due course as part of the formal consideration of the application. Northbound journeys on buses are going to be slightly longer as a result of stopping up Kingsgate Road. However, that increase in journey time is going to be less than 1 minute, which is Transport for London's sort of rule of thumb when assessing the impacts of new development in particular parts of London. So we're well within the normal expectation of what TfL would expect from that. And as far as southbound journeys down Richmond Road are concerned, they'll be slightly quicker than currently in the situation. So there's a slight sort of netting off and a slight improvement as far as movement through Richmond Road is concerned. Overall, the scheme delivers an improvement actually in terms of the operation of the network. What all the extensive transport assessment analysis and modelling is demonstrating, that the worst performing junctions that currently exist in this part of North Kingston are probably going to be operating better to a level of 7 or 8%, which is one of the positives of the scheme. So slight increase in journey times northwards through this part of North Kingston, with a circa 40-second increase in travel time for the buses in the worst part of the morning peak, and circa 10 seconds increase to northbound journeys in the Saturday peak, which is on a Saturday late morning. Southbound journeys slightly shorter, as the point makes there. And also the maximum average queuing during the peak hours extends halfway down 7 Kingsway. So we don't get to a point on 7 Kingsway where there is any queuing back onto Sopwith Way. So the queue lengths do increase, but they are managed by the rephasing of the traffic lights, both at the 7 Kingsway and Surrey Basin junctions, but also then at the Surrey Basin and Richmond Road junctions. And also there's a benefit then obviously in terms of the left turn onto Richmond Road from Sopwith Way as well. And there is up to a 60-metre, up to a 42-metre reduction then in queues southbound on Richmond Road, and 60 metres northbound on Richmond Road in terms of the changes that occur on the eastern side of the scheme. Just in terms of the looking at the way in which the network operates at the moment, what the image on the left-hand side is showing you is some of the queue lengths that you're seeing on the current situation. So here you've got 7 Kingsway here, the junction with Surrey Basin and Richmond Road, and the queuing that occurs here, and then the queuing that occurs at peak times on Kingsgate Road currently, and onto Richmond Road itself. And obviously there's existing queuing here as part of the movement on Sopwith Way, as part of the gyratory flow of cars and vehicles and buses around Kingston town centre as a whole. And there you've got an image on the right-hand side of the queuing that was documented from the cameras we had up, taking photographs of the junctions during the survey period, and you can see the level of queuing there. So that's a view looking south down 7 Kingsway at the junction with Surrey Basin. So this is now as a side-by-side comparison here. So the previous image on the left-hand side that I showed you on the last slide is replicated here, and here then is just a diagram produced on an exactly similar basis, showing what the queuing is going to be like then in the new scenario, obviously. Now, the queue length, as I mentioned in one of the earlier slides, there's queuing circa halfway down 7 Kingsway. Now, I have to say that this is the worst level of queuing, if I can say that. So this is taken at the peak of activity during the morning, which happens at circa typically around 8:05 in the morning. And obviously at other parts of the day, either before or after that, then the queuing obviously is a lot less and more typical of what you see on this side of the image here. So this is the modelled peak, if you like, in terms of the level of queuing. But it never gets back all the way down to the junction with Sopwith Way here at all, which I know was a concern previously in some of the representations that were received. Obviously, you do see some queuing increase on Surrey Basin here. Hopefully you can see my cursor here as well, but obviously you're seeing the removal of traffic completely on what is currently Kingsgate Road, and the complete priority that's given to both pedestrians and cyclists along that as part of that transport objective of improving pedestrian and cycle connectivity, both east-west and north-south. And you do get a slight increase as well in queuing on the Sopwith Way as part of the gyratory as well. Now I'm going to try and play you some modelled micro-simulation videos. So you'll just need to bear with me a moment as I come out of this presentation and just take you into some models. So what I'm going to show you now, this will just take a second or two to load. But what I'm going to show you now is if you like, the worst case scenario taken at 8:02 on a weekday morning, just to give you a sense of the reality of some of the data that sits in the transport assessment. So this is a visual representation of all the numbers and analysis which has been taken.
Mr. Mannering, I think you need to close down the presentation and start again and change the window that you because at the moment we're only seeing the PowerPoint presentation. So I think you need to end the presentation and then start again and pick the particular window with the video on it so everyone can see.
Thank you very much for that. can you now see an image centrally located within the screen?
Just at the moment you said that, yes, it's just come up, yes.
Okay. So what I'm showing you here is a micro simulation video of the modelling which is included in the transport assessment that accompanies the revised proposals in the planning application. This is taken at 8:02 in the morning. This is the worst case scenario in terms of the movements around the site. So I'm just going to let this video play for 60 seconds or so, just to give members a feel for the movements. There's quite a lot going on the video, but 7 Kings Way is obviously here, Sopwith Way to the south here, Surrey Basin in front of Sainsbury's and Queenshurst, and then you've got the Richmond Road coming down on the eastern flank of the scheme. So I'll just roll the video at this point and just let you watch that. So you can see here now we've got a red light at the junction with Surrey Basin and the vehicles starting to queue. The red light changes to green and the vehicles are released and they move over onto Surrey Basin and the junction with Richmond Road. But this is now the greatest level of activity, if you like, in terms of the morning peak at coming up to 8:05 in the morning. And this is obviously a speeded up video, but you can see the clock ticking in the top right hand corner. But what it does demonstrate quite clearly is the extent to which the movement does continue really quite successfully around the movements, recognizing what I've showed you in terms of the diagrammatic cues earlier. So I'm just going to come out of this slide now and just hopefully try and take you then to a different level of modeling. So I've just shown you the worst case scenario there. I'll stop sharing again and just come back into the now, hopefully you can see that chair again. I've got another image up centrally within the screen, timed at 8:02 again. So hopefully you can see that at the moment. Okay, well, I'll
yeah, I've got it, yeah.
Okay, great. I'll move forward then. I'll just roll this again. Now, this is a slightly lower split between 7 Kings Way and Richmond Road, just to give the council the 2 variables, if you like, in terms of. So we've looked really at the worst case scenario at the 90-10 split, and also then at the 75-25 split. And I'll just let this play as well. So you can see what's happening on 7 Kings Way here, and then Surrey Basin as well. So what this shows is queue lengths being shorter than we showed you in the worst case scenario. And again, all of the junctions, whether it's the junction here with Surrey Basin or again with Richmond Road, all working successfully, and obviously the southbound's flow on Richmond Road as well. So, and I think the reality of the situation is that the actual movement itself is probably going to be somewhere between these two scenarios. So we've just got another 8 seconds to play on it. Okay, so that covers off what I wanted to update the committee on in terms of changes to the transport aspects of the scheme, and I hope that's been of some benefit to bring to life some of the rather voluminous pages of analysis that are included in the application bundle, which we appreciate is difficult to comprehend, obviously, but is required in terms of making sure that the evidence and the analysis is there to support the proposals in the planning application. We'd be delighted to take any questions and clarify anything that wasn't clear during, and I appreciate there's quite a lot to take on board in that presentation.
Thank you very much. To members, what we've got a number of residents who wish to raise questions, and some have joined the meeting to ask those questions in person, and there's several other questions after that from residents that have not been able to join the meeting that will be put forward on their behalf. So I'm going to turn to those questions first. So if members can hold fire, undoubtedly you'll have questions, but I'll come back to members later for you to ask those questions. Hopefully you've got notes of the questions you want to ask. So we had five residents registered who to join the meeting to ask questions, and I think only 3 have been able to join. But for the others, I'll get Sam Nichols from Democratic Services to read out their questions on their behalf. So we start with, in the order that they came in, with Chris Arrowsmith, and I think Chris Arrowsmith is not in the meeting, wasn't able to join us this evening. So I'm going to turn to Sam. If you can read Chris's question out, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the question is, please can you reduce the height and number of units, as 70 stories is too high and not in keeping with the surrounding area or local resources available to support this many new flats?
Can I, Councillor Self, can I answer?
Thank you, Self. So thank you, Sam. And any of the applicant, if that's you, Joe, then please go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Hi there, and thank you for the question from the gentleman. Look, the height has obviously been a highly contentious aspect of this application from the start, and I'm going to split this question into 2 parts. One is, can we reduce the height, and B, can the council accommodate it? And I think I'm going to answer the second part first. The reality is that this is an opportunity area, and Kingston have got housing targets which are not being met. We have got to use sites that sit at town centres alongside stations, and we've got to create homes. And it's a very difficult one. And whilst, from the North Kingston Development Brief, there are huge amounts of that we've taken as very, very positive, and we feel it's an amazing document. It is a guidance document. And since the time that brief was written, this has become an opportunity area, and this does sit as one of the key sites for the provision of housing. So on the basis of, can the council accommodate this number of flats, the reality is the council, and we will have a requirement to create homes and create housing. I think the current target is 9,000 within the opportunity areas. In terms of the height, there is a very, very difficult balance that we as architects have to do when we look at a site such as this from a regeneration point of view. As an architect, we just want to design beautiful buildings and beautiful public realm and make the most amazing spaces. And we sit in a very, very difficult position of balance between high quality architecture and high quality public realm. But ultimately, we also have to deliver a comprehensive and viable approach that delivers affordable housing. In our terms, whether people feel the height is too high, we've come a long way back. But furthermore than that, I actually don't believe the height is inappropriate in the location that we have so close to the station. And there's been so much work done on the high quality architecture and aspirations for the overall building and its setting. to ultimately try and deliver that balance between design, between public spaces, between actually regeneration, and look at them in the locations that are most opportunistic for them. And ultimately, that's what this site is. So can we reduce the height? I don't think that we can deliver all of those other ingredients, which is being very, very tested by the council in every other way, without a reasonable quantum on the site of units.
Okay, thank you, Joe. We now go to Karen Elvey, who I think your question is also related to height. Obviously, we don't want repetitions, but you've submitted your question, so I'll ask you, and it's not asked in exactly the same way. So if you can go ahead, please, now's your chance. Thank you. Karen, I think you need, if you go Control D, that should unmute you. You're still muted at the moment. Or you can, if you move your cursor around, you can go to the bottom of the screen and click on the microphone button.
No, is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Yep, okay, thank you. Yes, I'm Karen Alvey. I'm a resident of North Kingston, and I've listened with interest to what Joe Cohen has been saying about this development. My question does mainly concern heights and the unacceptable scale and dominance of the proposed development that I also agree is out of keeping with the locality. But I'd also like to ask why many of the requirements of the North Kingston development brief have not been respected. Whilst I appreciate this is guidance, the brief was consulted on with local businesses, stakeholders and residents, and I can't see the point of going through such an extensive democratic engagement process if then the recommendations are not followed. So specifically, the document provides a diagram with a heights plan showing a maximum building height of 12 stories in a very small area, with all other areas of 9 stories and below. So clearly the 17 stories exceeds this. The document also states that any development will need to justify the height from many perspectives, including overall visual impact from both inside and outside the development, including protected views. I have a lot of questions about the views, but obviously I can't use that now, but I've put that in to the planning committee anyway. The impact on views from both Hampton Court and Bushy Park has not been visually shown, and I can't quite understand why not, because the Admiralty building, which is of a similar height to the proposal, is clearly visible from both parks and despoils the tranquility of these very precious green spaces. The document also advises that building heights must respond to the surrounding area and not negatively impact on neighbouring properties or spaces, especially listed buildings. It's clear that the new development will detract from the former Gala Bingo Hall, which is a listed building, and Kingston College, a building of Townscape merit. So I think it is in direct competition with them. And the brief also requires that the location design of any taller buildings described as landmarks or gateways must be explained and fully justified by a thorough townscape appraisal. The location of a 17-storey tower has not been fully justified. We already have the landmark Admiralty building in North Kingston, which itself is out of scale and character of the locality, and we do not need a second building of this scale. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn back to the applicant, whoever wishes to speak. I think it's Joe again. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Karen, for very well worded question. There's a lot of points to try and answer in that one. I'll start with the views first. We, at the start of this application process, actually to the start of last year, we I'm sorry, Karen, could you turn yourself to me? Thank you so much. We agreed all of the principal views of the site with the case office, and that's been evolved in the work that we've done, really mainly with the conservation officer and the heritage team. The views from Bushy Park and Hampton Park are unbelievably limited. So they are actually within the overall views that have been submitted within the document, but because of the absolute minimal impact on those views, they they are, but they are referenceable, and you can go and have a look at those, and very happy to help with that. In terms of the North Kingston development brief, I'm aware that you are aware that it's guidance and it's not planning policy as such. The North Kingston development brief is a very positive document. And what we've done is we've taken what we felt are the most positive aspects of that document, but in some ways we've ignored not just, the immediate 12 stories, but also, actually building hard line against the frontage on Sopwith Way, about looking at ring schemes, much like the Queensway, which are very insular rather than open. A huge amount of work has been done in terms of really looking at how we can find opportunity to deliver proper pedestrian routes through the site, to look at the site in conjunction with what's been delivered already. We have looked as much as we can in townscape terms of where the most appropriate parts to locate height on the sites are. So we've actually dropped down from the brief, actually the buildings along Richmond Road, because the impact on views to the Guildhall. We have had to look at this and to say that we have tested every type of proposal over the course of nearly 2 years, with the council, working with heritage consultants of our own and within the council's own heritage team. As an understatement, we have absolutely looked at every aspect of the scheme. I as an architect, I do, on a personal level, I do not want to build a building, that I'm not proud of, that doesn't have long-term benefits and doesn't feel appropriate. And we realize how much the residents, or some of the residents feel that the height is inappropriate or not appropriate to townscape, but we've had to go through all the stages to justify that. This is not a whim. In terms of the relationship with the heritage assets, such as the bingo hall, that hasn't, seeing something doesn't mean it's bad. Seeing something next to a heritage asset doesn't mean it's bad. It's what you see in the relationship between them. And I think that is something that, we can look at in many, many examples in London. It's about how a building's sited and located. It's about the quality of a facade behind, ultimately, that heritage asset or in location to it, or how something sits within townscape. But what those benefits are, as you say, from within the site, from the immediate location just outside of the site, and from the long view. And we feel that in terms of all the overall aspects that we need to balance within the site, within the context of where we are now in 2020 and going forward, for us, we feel that this is the most appropriate balance that comes with the benefits, as well as harnesses and understands some of the concerns from a townscape point of view.
Just to add to Joe's comments there on some of the heritage points as well, I think it's important to note as well that as part of the engagement process, obviously we've been speaking to bodies such as Historic England and the Royal Parks, and they are content with the scheme. They've seen the townscape analysis that accompanies the submission and the views from Bushy Park, and they've confirmed no objection to the revised proposals. So I think those are important sort of factors to bear in mind as well, in terms of the degree of scrutiny that the application has had from a heritage perspective. And the scheme as well has been through 2 separate panel review sessions with the design review panel, who've also looked at the scheme in depth from a number of locations, and they've sought improvements during the process, points that we've looked to address as part of these revised submissions. And again, I think that they've come to the conclusion now that the scheme is in a state and a condition that can be taken forward positively through the planning process. So the issues that you're talking about, Karen, have been scrutinised on a number of levels and through detailed analysis, not just within the council, but externally by a number of other key bodies that are important determinants of conclusions on these matters.
Okay, thank you. And now we've got Eileen Passar, I think. No, sorry, I do apologise. Next is David Elms. So it looks like you've unmuted and you're ready to go. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm a North Kingston resident since the 1980s, so I can remember trying to drive along Clarence Road, although you tended to be stuck in a queue. So I do really understand the need for this development and the work that's being put into it. I won't repeat the point about the height. That was one of the questions I asked. It is really to sort of, we would hope that the development brief is respected. The other point is really about the traffic signalling. We've had an update of that in terms of turning left up Richmond Road. Looking into this, it is starting to use 7 Kings Way as a part of the A Road network. And you look at the turning off Sopwith Way, and it's a single lane turning. Some of the information in the transport assessment showed that things like bin lorries would have to take a full sweep across both lanes to get into the service roads and so on. So it would be really trying to understand for this development whether it does extend too far, and more thought needs to be into this idea of, well, what traffic's going down 7 Kings Road? Is it wide enough? I noticed there's now a pedestrian crossing at the end of that, and in the modelling you could see that that was causing backups underneath the railway bridge. So it really is to understand clarity of this, what traffic goes down 7 Kings Road, what traffic's meant to go down Richmond Road, and is it wise to try and make Richmond Road 2-lane? And then the other point I had on unacceptable and incompatible use related to the fact that, as I understand it, it's a buy-to-rent development that's very heavily dependent upon the student accommodation market. So, for instance, on the Kingsgate Road unit, I think all the units are provided for student accommodation. Now, obviously, Kingston University is a really important part of our community and our local economy, but we all know that the sort of current situation regarding universities and how much they expect to be receiving students from abroad and so on means that the sort of idea of creating further student accommodation in Kingston must really be seen by the council as an element of risk, and therefore I would hope that they would ask the developers to submit a new economic viability report that looks into the reality of the current situation regarding student accommodation. So if I could hear replies on those, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you, David. I imagine Matthew will be answering your questions on traffic. I don't know about your separate question about the use. So over to you. It is Matthew. I think over to you, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for the points. I think. I mean, the transport assessment, slightly repeating what I said earlier in terms of the transport assessment is extensive in terms of what's being put forward and the way it's been analysed and scrutinised from the applicant's internal team. That is obviously now in the public domain. That's being looked at by anybody who's interested in the application, as well as the statutory requirements in terms of TfL and the council's transport team looking at it. We're happy to sit down with you and take you through that in more detail and go through some of the quite detailed points you've made. But obviously, to a certain extent, the scheme as a whole is picking up on the transport-related objectives of the brief, insofar as, this goes back to probably 2012, 2013, I think, probably initially, when some of these proposals were originally mooted and the council undertook its own investigative work in terms of movement around the town centre. So we were taking that sort of policy ambition, if you like, and bringing it forward in a specific planning application, and then putting all the supporting information, all the assessment, all the analysis in behind that, just to demonstrate, obviously, that it does work. Now, that is currently sitting with the transport team of the council. They are poring over that information and going through it in some depth. TfL are doing likewise in terms of its responsibilities as well. And there might be issues that come out of that process. We'll be more than happy to pick up on those and answer any queries. But also, we'd be happy to sit down. We've had quite a bit of dialogue and engagement with the North Kingston Forum directly. But we'd be more than happy to sit down with yourselves or a group of your colleagues maybe, and go through some of the detailed points around the transport assessment. But I think our position at the moment is we're comfortable with it. We think it works for the reasons I set out in the main presentation, but we'd be more than happy to take you through that in more detail with a view to trying to satisfy you that the answers are where we think they are, and hopefully that there is no residual concern left in terms of the way in which the scheme will operate post completion. On your second point with regards to the viability appraisal, I need to make something completely clear, if you like. This is a build to rent scheme that is available. It's a rented residential offering, if you like, rather than a conventional residential development which will be sold to individuals. This is an institutionalized backed build to rent product. It's going to be a rental product in perpetuity. It is not being designed for students or relies on occupation by students whatsoever. I think what you might have picked up, David, in the viability appraisal, there's quite a sort of elaborate valuation process that I'm no expert in, but just to keep it sort of simple, that relies in testing the viability of the scheme and the ability of the scheme to support a certain level of affordable housing. Now, part of the overall application site, which sits in front of the Queenshurst development, had a previous planning permission on it for a purpose-built student accommodation scheme. And I think that what you've picked up in the viability appraisal is the commentary that exists around that previous planning permission on that part of the site, and the extent to which that is relevant in terms of consideration for determining the appropriate level of affordable housing on the scheme as a whole, which is now submitted before the council. But categorically, this is not a student scheme. This is a build to rent scheme, and I can't stress that point enough. It's a really important point to understand, and all the documents in the planning application make that abundantly clear, and the application forms make it clear in terms of what we're seeking planning permission for as well. So I hope that I've answered that question, but again, we'd be more than happy to sit down with you and take you through that information in more detail if that was of benefit.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. We now go to Eileen Passar, I think is in the meeting, I hope. Are you there? Are you with us, Eileen? Sam, do you know if Eileen Passar, she was in the meeting, I know she left.
Yes, she is in the meeting, Chair. I think she may be having trouble unmuting herself. Eileen, if you press star and then 6, you should be able to unmute yourself on your mobile.
Ah. It'd be a pity if you can't join us, but is that the mobile symbol at the top?
It could be that she may need to rejoin the meeting via the mobile. I'll contact her separately.
If you could, we'll just wait to see whether that's possible. Just a moment or two. Just so people know what's going on, Eileen Passar has left the meeting and she's going to now rejoin, and hopefully we'll be able to actually speak to us, which would be great. Just whilst we're waiting, Sam, are you talking to Eileen Passar to get her to rejoin the meeting?
Yes, Chair.
I didn't know whether we could go to we've got one other question to be asked in this section, as it were, whether you could go ahead with that one or not whilst we're waiting. I think what we should do is go on to the Mark Pender's question,
So-
Sam. It's
So,
okay.
Chair,
Yeah.
I've spoken to Eileen. She's about to rejoin the meeting. What I'll
Okay.
do is,
Thank
if you're happy for me to do, I'll read out the other question.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, thank you. So we have a question from Mark Pender, who was going to join the meeting. He's been unable to do so. So Sam will read out his question on his behalf. Over to you, Sam. Thank you.
And just so you're aware, he has actually updated his question, Chair.
Okay.
It's actually much shorter now. So
Okay.
I'll read it out. As you do, so this is what he's written. As you do not own the Richmond Road part of the site, how will you deliver this part of the proposal, noting that my client and several of his neighbours do not intend selling, as they would like to pursue their own proposals for their land?
That's a very direct question. So over to whoever of the developers team wishes to answer that, which it looks like it's Matthew again. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I mean, this goes back to some of the introductory points that Joe and myself made about the council wanting to make sure that comprehensive development was brought forward, rather than having a sort of piecemeal approach to individual sites. So, you know, that's a not untypical planning objective, if you like, of many councils up and down the country who want to see comprehensive development to make sure that the scheme can deliver the most that it can deliver, whether that's on matters of public realm or whether it's on matters of affordable housing. So, and I think in terms of what we've done in terms of those properties, from a legal perspective, obviously we've served all the legal notices on them to make, obviously to declare the fact that a planning application was submitted last year. You know, that was done on the back of land registry searches. We've also publicised the proposals ourselves in the press on the back of those formal legal requirements that we're supposed to do. And also, outside of that sort of formal legal process, we've also invited many of those owners on Richmond Road to the consultations that were undertaken through 2019. And indeed, our client has fielded calls and inquiries from a number of those landowning parties, and to my knowledge, at least, most of them have been supportive, albeit I'm not professing to say that we've had contact from every individual party at all, but obviously in the spirit of this meeting and all the work that we've done over the last several years, we are more than happy to be talking to anybody at any time. So you know, we're happy to have ongoing discussions, as we have had with those people who've responded to the consultations that and formal notices that have been served through the process to date.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Eileen is back in the meeting. Are you now able to unmute? Could you see if you could unmute your microphone, Eileen? And Sam, I don't access. I access via a laptop and not a phone, which I think Eileen is. Could you remind her how to unmute on a phone, please?
Yes, Joe. I believe that it's different for different phones, but Google should be letting her know how to unmute. It should be either star or 6 or star and 3, I believe.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's good. Lovely. Good evening, Eileen.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the difficulties.
Okay, we can hear you. So if you'd like to go ahead with your question, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. I wasn't able to watch the video that you showed on the 8 a.m. morning traffic situation coming out of Sopwith Road, I believe. I was wondering, what date was that video made?
Okay, if you've got, we're not sure that's the whole of your question, but Matthew, you can let us.
No, that's one of my questions, and,
okay.
And then I wanted to say.
Yeah, yes. I'll let Matthew answer that now. Matthew, if you'd just like to come in and quickly answer, when was that simulation? When was that modelling done? What was it based on? What date?
That was done on the back of peak hour traffic surveys over successive weeks last year. So not during school holidays, not during Easter, not during COVID, normal operating times of the public highway and that part of the road network in North Kingston. And the video that we showed is a model that's the predicted situation, taking account of all the analysis that's been undertaken. And that is the times I was showing in those videos were sort of the worst case scenarios, the busiest times, if you like, which were at circa 2 minutes past 8 in the morning.
Okay, thank you. So basically, I am a grandmother who takes her grandchildren back and forth from Walton to Kingston. They are very young children, and I have really experienced enormous traffic queues prior to coronavirus in Wood Street on the filter going into 7 Kingsway for Sainsbury's. This is a really narrow road, and as it's planned to close the Kingsgate Road, I understand you are opening a little filter on Surrey Basin, but how are you going to fix the original problem coming from Kingston Bridge into Sainsbury's? And secondly, I'd like to say that I represent dozens of households and residents living in Deacon Road, Elm Road, Camberwell Road, who are living in detached and semi-detached houses with gardens, who are 800 meters away from this planned development. I would like to know if anybody has had any consideration on the impact this will have on our lifestyle and our privacy and everything else. That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's a two-part question really on the traffic again, and on the second one on privacy of local residents and overlooking, I guess, etc. Matthew, that's unmuted, so back to you, Matthew.
Yeah, so with regards to the, we've documented at length in the transport assessment that accompanies both the original submission that we made in September of last year, and also in terms of the revised proposals now. We've documented at length those existing traffic conditions that exist locally. We've done traffic counts, we've taken we've taken photographs of the traffic and the degree of queuing that exists, and all of that is set out. So yes, there are periods when traffic is heavy on Kingston, on some of those roads, Surrey Basin and around by Sainsbury's, obviously. But what these proposals are trying to do, obviously, is bring forward a change in which the road network operates, partly through design, partly through things like the way in which the traffic lights are going to be phased on some of these junctions, with a view to demonstrating that the scheme can be accommodated within this part of North Kingston from a transport perspective. So there's a huge amount of information in the application bundle, but what I would say, Eileen, is again, we'd be happy to sit down with you and take you through that. We've had a number of conversations through organisations like the North Kingston Forum, and on a number of occasions over the last couple of years. But again, we're more than happy to speak to anybody to take you through in more detailed some of the observations that you have in terms of those existing conditions, and explain to you how it'll be then with the development in place, and how the local road network will operate. With regards to your second point, again, there's all sorts of impact analysis documents which are included in the formal submission of the application. Some of those obviously are to do with impacts on properties which are probably a little bit closer in terms of things like sunlight daylight, which obviously we need to assess properly, and the council will want to review all the work that's been done to accompany the application on those points. But those are probably slightly more localized impacts in terms of physical impacts, which the application assesses. There are other than townscape issues, perhaps, which you're alluding to, again, which we've produced a fairly exhaustive townscape analysis of the development. It's been redone again in light of the changes to the scheme that have been made in the spring of this year, following the comments that we received on the application we submitted in September. So all that work has been redone again to take account of the new scheme. And with regards then to the impacts, perhaps slightly further afield in terms of the, I think you made reference to 600 or 800 meters, I think, away, then certainly from our perspective, we feel the townscape analysis picks up on those sorts of issues. And I think at that sort of distance as well, I think probably concerns around sort of direct loss of privacy and things are probably going beyond the realms of planning at that sort of distance. But from a townscape point of view, certainly at that distance and beyond, actually much further beyond, then the townscape analysis really does pick up on that and seek to address those points.
Thank you, Matthew. Sorry, Eileen. Yes, Eileen, did you want
well, I cannot agree with this. However, I do understand what I'm being told. But all the buildings around Surrey Basin are 7 stories, and yet you are coming closer to our houses, which are just semi-detached houses, and nearer to Richmond Park, and yet you are doubling on the floors.
Okay.
So I can't see the justification in it.
Thank you, Eileen. I say the councillors of this committee that will eventually later in the year be making a decision on that are listening to what you're saying. We're also listening to what the applicants are saying. So we're cognizant of what you're saying, and we're aware that your views may differ from those of the applicants. So I'll just leave it at that. But thank you very much for your question and making those points.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public participation. So thank you very much to those of you residents that were able to, that could join the meeting and ask your questions in person. You may now leave the meeting, and you can follow the rest of the meeting on the YouTube stream, on the council's YouTube channel. So thank you very much. We also have a number of other additional questions received from residents which have been circulated as late material. The issues relate to fire safety, building height, viability assessments, traffic study on 7 Kingsway, Richmond Road, Sopwith Way and Kingsgate roads, and the protected heritage assets. Some of those, well, most of those points have already been raised as questions. We don't intend to read the questions out. They've been circulated as late material, but we will give an opportunity for the applicant or the applicant's team to respond to those questions. We've got it's questions 6 to 13. I think that's I make that about whatever number of questions it is. 7 questions, is it? So we've got the first question 6 from Zachariah Dada. I hope I pronounced that right. It's in the late material. Applicants, do you wish to make any response to that, please?
Well, I think in terms of the friends of the owners on one of the properties on Richmond Road, who I think are going to be part of the scheme, I just refer you back to the answer I gave earlier in terms of both the formal process that we've had to go through in terms of engagement and the not so formal in terms of invitations to attend events and to hold dialogue. And again, we are more than willing to carry on those dialogue. People have picked up the phone to us from some of those properties in Richmond Road. The applicant has been speaking to them directly, and those, as far as I'm concerned, are aware. Have all been reasonably positive conversations. They understand, the greater objective of comprehensive development, and conversations will continue, no doubt, through the process.
Thank you. The next question was from Sally Arthur. It was really about the Kingston fire station remaining open. I'm not sure you're able to answer that particularly, but you may have a question generally, or a comment or answer on generally on fire safety. So again, it's up to you really how you wish to answer that. And over to you.
I think just in very brief terms, obviously we can't comment on the Kingston fire station situation, but the application is supported by a fire strategy which examines the safety of the development and its occupants, and we are taking account of the most up-to-date requirements from a building regulations perspective. So I think, but I can't comment on Kingston fire station specifically.
I understand that. Thank you. And we go on to question. It was number 8. Have you got that one? Question number 8.
Yes. Well, I think this goes back to some of the.
I think you possibly already answered it, but if you've got anything else to say, please do so. Yeah.
No, I've got nothing to add other than the fact that all the information that we've put in as part of the revised transport assessment is being heavily scrutinised by the Council's transport team, TfL, and any other party who's interested in that information. So again, we're here ready to pick up on anything that needs to be picked up on.
Okay, and similarly, I shouldn't say that. Sorry. Question 9 was also on the traffic, which you've gone into in some depth this evening. But question 9, did you wish to add anything or respond to that? You've got question 9 there.
Yeah, no, nothing further on that, Chair.
Okay, that takes us to question 10. Which was about sunlight, I think, and the effect it might have on Queenshurst and the Royal Quarter.
I could probably give an answer to that one. The question is, why is, am I correct, Councillor Surf, that the question is, why is the developer proposing to design and locate its own buildings and positions, ... Is that the correct question?
You've got the correct question, I think. Yes, it's the one saying it's not fair to the Queenshurst and the Royal Quarter buildings. Yeah.
Look, the ultimately, if the question is about raising height as we come closer to the station, away from the development to the north, that is not an abnormal sort of pattern of development to have deeper densities and concentrations as you come down towards the town centre. When I did my initial proposal or presentation to you earlier, I did show some of the work that we'd done to move the buildings adjacent to Queenshurst south away from those buildings, and that was actually on the basis of all the work that was done with the daylighting and sunlighting consultants that we've had on the scheme. So there has been a huge amount of energy that's been put in to make sure that we are achieving the required levels on that.
Just to add to Joe's point on that as well, that there was a planning permission on the part of the site that immediately abuts the Queenshurst development, which is the old Kingsgate Business Centre site. And there was a planning permission actually granted for a similar volume of building on that site itself as it relates to the relevant part of the application now being proposed. And that was granted planning permission actually before the Queenshurst development. So Queenshurst was given planning permission in the knowledge that there was a prior planning permission for the student scheme, which I alluded to earlier. So we haven't sought at that particular interface between the application site and an adjoining site. We haven't sought to push the boundaries and that. And as Joe has said, actually, we've gone further in terms of pulling the building away compared to that student planning permission, and creating the drop in the break in the building as well, down to to a much lower level, obviously, to improve the permeability and spacing between buildings at that point.
Okay, thank you. Question 11 is relating to height, and I think that you've. Is there anything you wish to add to what you've already said this evening?
No.
No. Okay, thank you. Question 12 was about affordable housing. Maybe you would like just to comment on that.
Yes, thank you. We are, the question is correct to say, obviously, that the percentage of affordable housing has reduced. That is a direct consequence of the changes that we've made to the scheme. And again, it was part of the intention of the original submission as to why that scheme was conceived in the way it was to try and absolutely maximize the level of affordable housing, and to try and hit that 35% London Plan fast track approach, from day one. But there are consequences, obviously, in terms of losing units from the scheme. That proposal that is now currently before the council is 25%. It's still an exceptionally substantial offer. It's still probably one of the leading offers that an applicant has made in Kingston in the last I don't know, 5-10 years, off the top of my head. And significantly, it provides 94 actual units. When looking at the annual monitoring statements, obviously for the last number of years, I think roughly it's been a total annual provision average, I think, of something like 55 or 60 units. So we are still trying to be very much class leading and pushing the envelope in terms of trying to absolutely maximize the level of affordable that this scheme can deliver.
Okay, thank you very much. And the final question is number 13, which covered a number of points, including those relating to heritage assets, open space, and sustainability. It was quite a long question, but you may wish to answer any of those points. It's over to you. Over to you as in development team. Thank you, Joe.
Hi. Oh, Matthew, would you prefer to this? I'm happy to do it. Look, as we've said earlier, the application is supported by a heritage assessment, and the council have appointed their own heritage assessors for it. There's obviously been consultation with Historic England, with the parks, looking at that. Critically, actually, that question starts to talk about sort of legal views as acts of parliament. The view towards the Guildhall is actually of critical importance. On that, the view towards Guildhall is protected, as well as that we've had to consider the panorama from looking from Richmond Park as part of that. But we need to now look at that in the context of all of the other developments that are coming through within the borough, some approved and some in the pipeline. In terms of the Gala Bingo Hall, ultimately the listing is primarily related to the interior of the Bingo Hall. It's a fairly robust building, and we haven't had any concern brought on development in adjacency to it. I'm just trying to read through the rest of the question. In terms of sustainability, we're meeting all of the requirements for sustainability, and also putting in place all of the required measures to meet future sustainability targets coming through. Apologies, I'm reading frantically. in terms of the deficit of public open green space, and I think there's an aspect of that question relating to it, we also feel that there is lack of green space in this part of North Kingston, and actually it was a key driver in the design for the public realm and the consideration at ground level. And in certain ways, we went much further than the North Kingston Development Brief, which located the principal public green space at the centre of the scheme, at the middle of that cross. We've actually looked to create an additional park on Sopwith Way, really to soften and enhance that environment, which I think everyone, probably feels the same, is quite a discordant and very difficult one-way gyratory system. I'm just reading through. There's a huge amount of detail in this question, Councillor Surf, which I think I'm going to struggle to answer all of it. But ultimately, a key part of this is that ultimately, we do, there's a criticism here in terms of and the requirement for new homes, but ultimately we do need to deliver new homes, and Kingston's got its part to play in the wider London framework of opportunity areas. The housing targets are set by the London plan, not just, and whilst we're looking at things very locally, we have to think that, that there are larger targets and bigger national frameworks at play, but ultimately that, through all the scrutiny we've gone through, the design and review panels, the work with the planning teams, the responses we've done to local residents, all of the concerns that we've raised, I very much hope that, we have in some way been able to satisfy or at least explain, some of ultimately the issues that are being raised and continue to be raised for the application.
Thank you very much.
Matthew, do you want to add anything more to that one? Because you're probably reading while I'm talking, and there's so much in that question.
No, I think you covered it, to be honest, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. That ends questions that we've had from residents. We now turn to last but not least, questions from members. So if members could, if you just to remind you, if you want to ask a question, if you just type your name in the chat function, then we'll pick it up there. And Councillor Cunningham has gone first, so over to you. At the moment I've got David and then Roy. So over to you, David. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Yes, I wish to ask a question about the conformity with council policy, and again, in particular, the approved North Kingston Development Brief. If I can remind you, at the Council Growth Committee on the 7th of February 17, which I chaired, we were given written notification from you, the developer, that you would commit by way of a condition precedent to the contract for sale to develop a scheme which conforms with the North Kingston Development Brief. As the scheme you are now proposing, albeit now slightly lower than previously, it is still considerably taller than the height in the North Kingston Development Brief, the majority of which is 4 to 7 stories with a maximum of 12 stories. So my question is, why have you changed your mind and brought forward this application in total disregard of the North Kingston Brief and your earlier undertaking? I think that's probably for Matthew, and I probably have a supplementary.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Matthew, if you wish to, if whoever, I'll go to the applicant, whoever wishes to answer, but Matthew, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cunningham. I think it's difficult for me to comment as a chartered town planner in terms of the contractual position, in terms of the memorandum that you've referred to. But I think from a planning point of view, as we've tried to set out during this evening, there has been an increasing sort of emphasis as well in terms of the London plan, in terms of
with respect, with cutting in on you, I'm not asking you as a planner. I thought you as a developer, you were coming forward to be able to answer questions from members of the committee and the public. So I think the question I asked is a reasonable question. As you've now admitted, you did make this undertaking. You've now gone back on that undertaking, and I'm really trying to find out the reason why.
I think all I was trying to say, Councillor Cunningham, was that I'm not party to that agreement myself. I can, we can come back to you separately, with my colleague Nick Hornby from Apache is on the call as well, in terms of being able to maybe more specifically involved, because he was involved in the contractual discussions. But Nick, I don't know whether you want to come in on that.
That absolutely.
Through the chair, please, or answer it. Yeah, but Nick, please do come in. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Self. David, Councillor Cunningham, thank you for your question as well. The undertaking that we've got with the council from a legal perspective is to have due consideration for the North Kingston Development Brief. We are not bound by it. We have to recognise it, but there isn't an absolute condition that we have to conform with the guidelines that it details.
My question is not about what you've got now. My question is, in agenda item J25 on the 7th of February, we had this written statement that you...
Sorry, David, could you please ask your questions through the chair, please? Thank you.
Sorry, well, I think you were probably at the meeting as well, Chair, so you may well...
You can carry on, David. Thank you.
Perhaps I should let the developer carry on his point. I think the point I was trying to say is there was this commitment, which obviously a lot of people relied upon, and now we find this commitment is no longer valid.
Well, I think that's slightly misleading. Oh, sorry, Councillor. Sorry, my brain's working in overdrive. Just to respond to that, Councillor Self and David, Councillor Cunningham, we are fully recognising the North Kingston Development Brief. We are recognising that there needs to be a coordinated approach to all the sites that are partly in our control and partly in other people's controls. We've adopted all the other elements in terms of public realm, transport requirements, etc. There is a deviation on the height-wise, but like I said before, we never made any commitment to be absolutely bound by the parameters that the North Kingston Development Brief detail. We have, though, recognised all of it, and we've tried to enhance where possible. And you know, a byproduct of adopting the large majority of the North Kingston Development Brief is a breach of the detailed 12 stories, but there's a commercial viability point that has to be recognised when you're delivering 95% of what the North Kingston Development Brief had vision for.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And I think, David, your question has been answered. It may not have been answered in the way that you, what should we say, desired, but I do think it's been answered, and it's up to members to for us to draw our own conclusions in due course, or when we come to make the decision. Thank you, David, and thank you, Nick. I'm going to turn to Roy, Councillor Aurora, for your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A number of the questions that I had have already been asked. We've talked at length about the height, so I won't touch upon that. There's one question which was asked earlier, but I don't think it was actually answered. And that was to do in the report under paragraph 20, refers to phase 2 of the development, includes 13 to 43 Richmond Road Retail Parade, and also mentions that this land is outside of the applicant's ownership. It would appear that the success of this scheme is somewhat dependent quite heavily on the delivery of phase 2. But judging from some of the questions and indeed some of the comments that we've had tonight from owners or representatives of the owners of these retail units, it would appear to me that the applicant is some way away from organising or acquiring these units. So my question is, what contingency plans, if any, do you have in place if phase 2 is not possible because a deal could not be done with these retailers? How does that affect your overall design? And in particular, I'd be very interested to know what, if any, impact would this have on the left-hand turn from Sopwith Road into Richmond Road? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roy. It seems a very, what should we say, reasonable question. Over to you on the applicant side, whoever wishes to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aurora. I think what I would say is that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, that there has been these varying levels of engagement over quite a protracted period of time. And it's not uncommon, really, for where local authorities are putting forward proposals for comprehensive development, that not all of those sites are secured at the time that a planning application is being formally submitted and formally considered by a particular planning authority. So that's not an uncommon situation with regards to larger regeneration schemes where councils, for understandable planning reasons, want to make sure that the most of the opportunity is taken. And you know, we have entered into that approach at face value and have wanted to bring the Richmond Road properties in rather than purely design a scheme on more limited parts of the site. Having said that, obviously you're correct to say that there's uncertainty around phase 2. There's a number of ways that can be dealt with. Obviously, getting planning permission actually is an important stage of that process, I should say, in terms of being able to move forward. It creates a degree of certainty with regards to planning decisions as to what a potential development might be. It is an important point to make. That allows then more substantive discussions to take part with certainty of planning in place and everything that the scheme has to deliver from a public benefits point of view, whether that's affordable housing or public realm or other matters. And that creates an environment in which then discussions can continue with those landowning parties. And an example of that, obviously, is with regards to the print works, which is on the junction of 7 Kings Way and Surrey Basin, where when we made the application, you know, that was still in a separate third-party ownership. And now that, as part of this process, that's been brought into the control of the applicant, and terms have been agreed with a view to delivering this comprehensive approach. Having said that, given the uncertainty, obviously, we've sought to provide information to the council of what happens in the event that phase 2 isn't delivered, and we've produced quite a lot of information as part of the revised submission, explaining then what the relationship is between the scheme and the remaining parts of Richmond, of the Richmond Road Parade in particular. But obviously, part of the uncertainty on the western side has been removed by the applicant being able to secure that third-party ownership that existed when we made the application.
Okay, thank you. Roy, were you indicating that you wanted to come back on that? Or...
If I may, please, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mannering. You mentioned that you have already presented to the council with some proposals as to if you're not successful in acquiring those sites. Very succinctly, I know we've got limited time here. Are you able to just share that with us? What would the scheme look like if you're unsuccessful in that endeavour?
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, what the information demonstrates, we've looked at the impacts arising from the development, both with phase 2 and without phase 2. So there are two parts, if you like, to the assessments, and that's why, for example, taking account of the left turn onto Richmond Road, obviously, which was an important part of the North Kingston development brief, you know, through the discussions we had with the officers, that they said, well, okay, understand that there might be a separate process with regards to the acquisition of phase 2, but, you know, where do we stand in terms of phase 1? Well, we've amended the scheme. Despite the scheme working in transport terms and traffic terms, it worked without that left turn onto Richmond Road. We've sought to deliver it as part of the phase 1, not requiring any of those existing properties in Richmond Road that currently exist in that parade to be moved at all. Now, that's not the full solution, obviously, that would come forward if phase 2 came forward as well, but it does allow vehicles up to 7.5 tons to turn left onto Richmond Road and those would be delivered as part of the phase 1 works. So that's a sort of mini example, if you like, of how some of the infrastructure would be provided to support the scheme, and explicit references in the North Kingston development brief, despite the fact that from a transport perspective, at least, purely transport, the scheme that we submitted last September did work in transport terms, but we haven't sought to push back on that. We've sought to include that now in the revised submissions following the feedback that we'd had from the council.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to a question from Councillor Ryder Mills. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief, but I've got 3 questions. One straightforward one, I hope, and that is, what kind of affordable housing product are you envisaging? Is it just going to be 80% of market value? Is it going to be London affordable? Is it going to be social rented? The second question it comes back, if I may, to the traffic modelling. And to put it as a question, are you sure? Because the models that you've given us this evening really don't bear any recognition in my mind to what I've experienced on the ground on many occasions, not just at morning rush hour, where there has been considerably more backup than you're suggesting, even without without taking Kingsgate Road out of it. So I'm a little worried that we are actually getting a true representation of what's actually going to happen should this go ahead. My third question is a bit bizarre, but it is a lot was based on the proximity to Kingston Station. There is a thought that many people will be very apprehensive about going back to their old-fashioned commuting to central London, even after the COVID crisis is over. And were this to happen, then and they would choose a much more local based work from, this rather takes away the need for this volume of housing so close to the station. So were this to happen, what would your response be?
Thank you, Dave. To add to Councillor Ryder Mills's question, the second one was on the traffic modelling. When you come to answer that, you can answer. Maybe you could expand on, like, who did the traffic modelling, and how has it been independently assessed? And I'm assuming that TfL are involved and are either doing their own modelling or are scrutinising your modelling, if that's the case. Over to the applicant's side. You've got 3 distinct questions.
Okay, I'll take that second question first, then, if I may, about the traffic modelling. That has been put out to a completely independent company whose sole instruction effectively was to count what is going on and to take photographs and video analysis of what is happening at those junctions. So that is automated traffic counting hardware, if you like, in terms of equipment that's placed in the road that physically counts the number of vehicles that's happening. We support that then through further fixing of cameras to street furniture and things, again to have the similar outcome in terms of providing
my question being answered,
in terms of providing empirical data. And that is then put into the public domain in terms of and also actually we had information from the council itself in terms of some information for part of the development area, for example on Kingsgate Road, and we've also factored that in as well. So we've tried to take all reasonable sources of action, sources of information, take that empirical data and then do the analysis on the back of it. But, it's a case of then, don't take our word for it. Also, then it goes through the scrutiny of the council's transport team. They come back with queries on things which we've sought to answer through the process. And also Transport for London have been an important scrutineer, if you like, of the information as well. And it's important that, to conclude now, that we've had confirmation back from TfL that they have endorsed the modelling that has happened, and that includes obviously the baseline situation, which you referred to, Councillor Ryder-Mills, as well. So it's there for, we've tried to put it all into the submission. There's a lot of information in there, and we're happy for that to be scrutinised and for any questions to come back, and obviously we will be happy to answer them. With regards to the affordable question you asked, obviously the London plan is the main source of policy guidance with regards to build to rent developments in London, and we are trying to take a policy compliant approach as far as that is concerned. So the offer that we're putting forward as part of the application process is for so total proportion is 25% of the units to be affordable, and the way that affordable is delivered is through 70% of the discounted market rent at 80% of market rent, so the point that you alluded to earlier, and then for 30% of the affordable to be London living rent, which is the social dimension of the affordable housing mix which the London plan seeks to bring forward. And that's split proportionately across the scheme on a completely tenure blind basis, and you won't be able to tell the difference between walking in one flat and another flat as to which one might be offered on a more affordable basis. So, and all residents within the development have full access to all of the facilities, so there's no separate access points or any of those sorts of issues that I know can come up on schemes.
Thank you. And the last point was Councillor Ryder-Mills' question on the need for the building next to Kingston, or next to the station, in this case Kingston Station, given a possible post-COVID scenario of people no longer, or a lot fewer, fewer people wishing to commute. Is that have I summarised your question? You can just correctly there, Dave. I think so. Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting question. I think obviously, the situation that the country has experienced in the last, 4 or 5 months is unique, obviously. I think from the applicant's perspective, just on a delivery point of view, I think they see more demand than ever for this sort of build to rent product, and the fact that this scheme in particular, in terms of the mix of other uses it's proposing, in terms of the trying to pull forward grade A office space for people, and the way that people can live in the building and have the ability to work from home in the co-working spaces, all plays to that agenda of creating ultimate flexibility for the occupants to be better suited perhaps than a scheme that was designed 3 or 4 years ago or something, and has now been built out and completed, whereas on a more traditional sort of residential basis of a flat of a certain size conforming to space standards, but not providing the internal amenity space and the ability to socialize and circulate that this scheme delivers. So the applicant, I know, is extremely positive about this. They feel that if there were more of these schemes around the country as a whole, and in London specifically, then these would have created great spaces, high quality spaces for people to live in, and also to in terms of the ability to work properly from home, rather than perhaps just relying on sitting on a sofa or something, but having the proper space to be able to do that. And I think with regards to the local locational point you made about, you know, being close to the train station, you know, fundamentally that is still, I don't think COVID changes anything in terms of that being the most sustainable location in terms of where you want to put development. You know, Kingston is extremely well served in terms of its social and economic infrastructure. It's all located in the town centre. I think most people would say, well, put new development in the areas which have access to that social and economic infrastructure. It's there in the town centre. And you know what is clear, you know, the housing crisis generally in the UK is not going to change on the back of, you know, the need for housing is the need for housing. That's not going to change on the back of COVID. We need to provide homes for people, and you know, these are still the best locations to put these sorts of developments. Otherwise, you start looking at releasing greenbelt and a broader spatial strategy, if you like, in which to accommodate whatever housing requirements put forward by a strategic plan.
Thank you very much for that, Matthew. I think that wraps it up pretty well. I'd like to thank yourself, Matthew, and Joe, and all the rest of the applicants' team who have been with us this evening. That there aren't any other questions, no other councillor names have come up in the chat function. We've obviously been listening intently and taking note of what residents have been asking and what the response is. And this application will be coming to a future meeting of the Development Control Committee for it to be determined. So with that, I'm going to we go on to the next item, which is urgent items, and you'll be pleased to know that there are no urgent items. So I can close the meeting at 21:36. Thank you all very much.